Hey guys, Dante here and welcome back to my channel, The Burgos Art, and welcome to another edition of the Toy Chest, where I make figurines, old and new. Now what you see right here is the Instagram account of my good friend Glenn, aka Red-Spectra, and as his description shows, he's into retro video games and a number of other things. I knew him first as, well, Glenn the artist, and he still draws to this day, but he likes to put down the back burner. But speaking of drawings, we're going to focus today primarily on his avatar, his character, Mars. Mars has been around for a very long time in his sketchbooks, and whether you follow him on Twitch, Instagram, or Twitter, you will see a variation of this character showing up as his avatar. And since he is a good friend of mine, I figure it's about time I do some fan art of Mars. So, without further ado, let's jump into the construction of this cool guy as a small statuette. As always, if you want to skip the how-to of how I made this character, you can skip ahead to, let's say, this timestamp right here. And without further ado, let's get going. So to start off, I have dissected Shinji. Essentially, I just pulled off what is the assembly required part, which is his legs. Now, obviously, in the factory, his head, his hair, his arms, and his shirt were all separate pieces. And I could use a heating gun to separate that, but I'm afraid it's going to warp the rubber and rubbery plastic too much. So I'm going to try and mold it in these two pieces, which is the one piece of the body, which is going to be the trickiest, and the piece which is the legs, which I am using a Lego construction to make a frame, which is a trick I learned from several people over on Instagram. So fun fact, if you've watched any of my videos or even seen any of my stuff on Instagram especially, you know usually I'll do a sandwich mold. I'll do one half and then I'll do the other half, and it'll be two molds, two halves of one mold, kind of like this piece right here. It's two halves of one mold. But for this, I am kind of going quick and fast. So I'm just going to do one mold all around them. And then I will cut a zigzag pattern down the sides and kind of rip the mold in half. I don't like doing that, but I want to try and see if it works for this one, because the legs are pretty simple. It's the upper body that's the hardest. So we'll have to address that when we come to it. But for now, let's get our cups out and let's start mixing, shall we? Alright, so the first mold actually came out great. Even though it was a singular mold, I very carefully, in a zigzag pattern, cut along the edge of either side of the pants leg, and then very carefully, with a really sharp X-Acto knife, just plucked away down the center. And there we go, one mold for the legs. Bad news is, Shinji's top half is really complicated. So I am going to do a proper sandwich mold. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but right here are some pieces of plastic that are interlocking with his open fingers. Because that's going to be an issue for not just the mold, but when we pour resin into it, because his fingers are kind of curled upward, you're going to get an air bubble. So hopefully that little bar will create a reservoir that goes, air reservoir, that will allow air to go from the fingertips up to his centerpiece and out. Speaking of which, he has a singular block on top of Lego blocks. Now, the issue with using Lego blocks repeatedly for this process is that you get little bits of the clay, rather than the mold, stuck in between. So after a while of sandwiching them, they're not as tight as they need to be. So I cleaned these as much as possible, pushed them down, and I went ahead and put duct tape all around the edges and some of my plastilina clay, because Rioflex is very kind of greasy, if that makes sense. So any kind of tape or material, it slides right out. But really squeezing this type of clay against the plastic, it gunks it up. It clogs it up. So we got tape, Lego blocks, and clay. And as always, I managed to squeeze a little, really tight fitting random gun from a transformer into a separate mold in case we have too much on this initial pour. The problem is, I don't know if we'll have enough to do both sides of the sandwich with what I have in stock right now. But for now, let's go ahead and mix this up, pour it in, and see what we get. Should I be wearing gloves? Yes, I should. All right, so there we go. His hair might be kind of close to the edge, but it's still covered enough. And I didn't even have to use runoff. I poured just enough. Well, technically I poured just too little and then added just enough. But yeah. Hopefully it soaks into every air bubble. We will most likely need to do some trimming with a X-Acto knife afterwards to get some fine details out. But I believe that is one half of the mold, and we might, judging by the weight, I might have enough to do the second half. Once we have both halves of the mold done, and once we get a proper cast, the rest is actually all just sculpting. This is not going to be a standard like a figurine with joints and everything. This is going to be more like what Shinji is. It's going to be a statuette. So here are the two molds. Once again, I cut the leg mold down with a little zigzag pattern. Kind of cheated on doing that. The sandwich mold for the hand, for the arm, legs. I'm stuttering. The sandwich mold for both arms, the body, and the hand was really tricky, but I managed to do it so well, in fact, that here are the legs, and here is the torso, and it came out pretty damn good. A little tiny imperfection in the hands, like literally I'm missing like a finger. That could be sculpted over. There's a little bit of an air bubble issue by the hair. It had plenty of movement to go out. It's just such a narrow spot that, like, yeah, it's tricky for the liquid to pour into it. But once again, a little bit of sculpting, a little bit of carving, and it came out so smooth. In fact, I didn't even have to do any sanding on the connecting points. They just click together. And there's Shinji. So I now have a working Shinji mold. Once again, gonna sand out a few imperfections here and there. But with this, I can now start actually sculpting it and not have to worry about damaging it, because if I damage it, I can always just make a brand new one. And that is the molding process. Also, I estimated how much I needed for his mold, but as always, for his casting, but as always, I have extra molds on the side in case there's a kind of overflow. So I also managed to get a base out of it, a small, like 1-inch base out of it, and this old rattle. If you've ever seen, I know what it looks like. But it's actually an egg with a tail sticking out the back of it, and it's a rattle from the that old show Dinosaurs. And I think I have the original somewhere around here. I don't know, it's somewhere. It's not what it looks like, but it's creepy enough where I decided to make a last-minute mold of it. And yeah, it's always good to have small molds nearby in case you overestimate how much liquid you need. And I don't know if I might just use the flat base and just completely customize the flat base for him. But yeah, now everything else is pretty much, everything else is sculpting, sanding and sculpting, and trying to get him to look like the person I want him to look like. But yeah, so let's keep going. So I've taken our resin figurine and I sanded down the sleeve on this side as best as I could to kind of capture an organic arm. And I think it comes out pretty good. I think I sanded it just enough where it's still like the arm itself, not a weird shape. Then I'm using the Army Painter's green stuff, which is normally used for miniatures, like D&D miniatures, such as this. And I'm trying it out instead of using my regular freeform sculpt to see how well it works. And it seems to work well. It seems to work very well. It sticks to the model well enough without it sticks to the base of the figure well enough without it sticking to my fingers like crazy. So I don't know. Maybe it's something else I'll also use. I just the amount I get, like the bang for your buck per package, is not as cost efficient as the freeform. But if it works out, it works out. And I'm attempting to just give him his wrinkled kind of sleeveless shirt. I'm only doing one side because he's gonna have a cape that kind of overflows the other side. And right now I'm just working it in, doing the wrinkles, trying to match what's already in the casting, and just adding some details. The real trick is filling up the holes that make up his bangs, whatever you want to call them, his man bangs. I need to fill in those areas, but it's coming along pretty well so far. Especially since I don't have to worry about the back, I don't have to worry about one side of it. It was a matter of just sanding down his collar, sanding down the shirt to get rid of the pocket he had, because Shinji wears a dress shirt, a school uniform, while this character that I'm turning him into does not. So I'm just gonna keep sculpting. And in the background, you can see another project I'm also working on. Either you'll probably see the video for that before or after this video. I have no idea. So stay tuned for that. Okay, I have to admit, when it comes down to doing smaller details, the green stuff is freaking awesome. Yeah, it sticks just the right amount. It doesn't stick to your tools too much, like the freeform scope. Freeform scope, I think, is better for much larger swaths of area, big sculpture pieces. But little things like this, I mean, after all, it is once again made for miniatures. Yeah, I think I'm really enjoying this material. I don't know, bang for your buck in terms of money, but in terms of quality, in terms of how much you get, maybe not so much. In terms of quality of it, yeah, I am now a avid lover of the green stuff, and it has a good work time. I'm using water to work with it, and so because online they said you could use water, no need for like other chemicals or whatever. And yeah, I got all this nice fine detail, which would be much harder with the freeform sculpt because it just sticks onto everything, and once you wet your tools enough, it slides off. It's this weird in between. So yeah, I think a mixture of this with freeform, whenever I'm doing bigger sculptures and bigger pieces, might just do the trick. And I'm really happy with the way this is coming out so far. In fact, I think most of the sculpting detail on the body is done. Now it's just a matter of sanding it together. Let me stand this up right here. Stand. Do not fall. Do not fall. You're gonna fall anyway. Hold on. Boom. Yeah, I think really all that's left is to sand this down, just to get some final like little small details in there. And then the real trick is his cape. He's gonna have this big cape. He's gonna have this really large collar around him. Now I want to sculpt it just right where it won't cover too much of the detail, like that special ring he has in his chest, which is a detail I don't want to lose at all. And I just gotta add some horns to him, and then from there, yeah, just figure out how I'm gonna paint it. Let's keep going. So as I mentioned earlier in this video, I'm beginning to really enjoy using the green stuff. And it is great for small details like his wristband and that ring on his shirt. But I realized when you're doing larger flat areas, such as his collar and this piece going over his arm, there was a bit of flex to it. I mean, it deflects is still, it deflects is actually kind of still there, a little bit of a movement. And I don't know if that's me mixing it incorrectly, which is kind of impossible to do. It's 1-to-1. But I noticed that once again, using my regular freeform scope, that stuff hardens like a rock. The difference is when you're working on it, it droops. It's really soft, but it hardens like a rock. On the opposite end, when you're using the green stuff, it doesn't get all droopy, but it doesn't harden like a rock. It's like the opposite. So for the majority of the cape, I've just been adding layers and layers very slowly of my regular freeform sculpt to get the shape of the cape. This is my first time sculpting a cape. So yeah, it's not the best, but it's holding its shape at least. So yeah, I think we'll get there with a little bit of sanding and finer details. Speaking of which, I finally added his horns, which came out a little bit bigger than I wanted to, but I think it still works very nicely. So without further ado, let's show our finished product of Mars. Ta-da! I am extremely happy with this. I know I say that a lot about my pieces, but this piece has a special place in my heart. As I mentioned earlier in the video, this is the OC and as of right now, the avatar image for my good friend Red-Spectra, who you can find on Instagram and on Twitch, where you can find many of his images and let's plays of retro games and just rare games from Japan and all around the world. And with that said, he's also a great artist. So this was his character he made a while back. And I told him, I want to make fan art of your character. And here we are. So let's do a little quick turnaround. So Mars is standing on a small, about 3-inch platform that I sculpted little rock detailings, little stalactites, stalagmites, whatever you want to call them. He has this big flowing cape and high collar that was primarily sculpted in epoxy freeform sculpt. That's a smooth on sculpt with the green stuff epoxy clay from Army Painter for the finer details. Let me zoom in a bit as well. As shown earlier in the video, I used the green stuff for the details of his wrinkled shirt. I used it for his very thin collar buckle and his actual collar, as well as a few smaller details such as the leg straps and kind of weird belt buckles. The green stuff is really good for small detailing, but as you get larger and larger, it's good to use a different type of epoxy. He is essentially sculpted and painted as a kind of mixed media project. So let's get him nice and close. Here we go. Now you can see the details much clearer. To paint, rather to sculpt the horns, I drilled 2 small holes in the head and glued in some aluminum wire as the base and just gently sculpted out the horns. Here's a clearer shot of the foundation as well that he stands on. He's glued onto that foundation. He actually separates at the waistline, which made it easy to paint him. And speaking of painting, he was a pain in the butt to paint. You see, for reasons unknown to me, even though I primed him head to toe in a special priming spray paint, my usual airbrush paint would not take to him. It fought me every step of the way. So he is actually a bit of a mosh podge, a bit of a mix of enamel paint and water-based airbrush paint. So the enamel paint was primarily the silver bits on his armor, the majority of the red of his cape, and a mixture of gray and black. And then for the highlights, I used the airbrush paint for dry brushing. Pretty straightforward, solid colors, black wash to get into the fine details, and then strokes of dry brush to bring up the highlights within. Like you see a bit lighter colors here in the cape where the folds are at, lighter color here, which helps catch the light. The only spots in which I didn't do shading and just went straight forward with a base color is for his skin tone, because skin tone is a pain for me. So the clothes all have, like, you can see the dry brushing of grays over these black pants to help, you know, break up the shape. Lots of dry brushing of browns and yellows over this more like dirt brown base. You have a chipped up cape, because in the original sketches he showed me his cape is all torn up as it waves in the air. This is not my best sculpting when it comes to cloth, because I don't sculpt cloth. Well, technically, I guess this would make it my best sculpting. It is not the best sculpting of cloth. It was extremely hard to get that face. I literally just did white with little black dots for the eyes. Luckily, that's pretty much what his character has. His character doesn't have, like, ultra shiny, reflective anime eyes, even though he is based, of course, on an anime character. Or at least in terms of style. Red-Spectra's style is, in my opinion, just like, it stands on its own, but it definitely has, you know, influences from, like, well, the old Evangelion series. And you can make fun of me based on how I say that, because I know everyone says it should be said a different way. The horns are orange that fade into yellow that fade into orange with a little bit of red at the base of the skull. And yeah, that's pretty much a straightforward figure. I'm just really happy that this came out in the style in which it came out. As shown earlier in the video, I used an actual pre-existing base of anime character because I knew I wouldn't be able to sculpt like the proportions to get it just right of this, you know, this genre of 90s anime. So having that base to start off with really helped. And he is sturdy. Like, I'm not going to toss him across the room, but that cape is like a sturdy, like rock hard clay. And he's glued down. Like I said, the waist comes off, so you can actually disassemble slightly. And everything held together very well. I will be sending this to Red-Spectra. And who knows? Maybe I'll do even more of my fellow artists, personal friends. Maybe I'll do more of their characters as well. And I want to say, yeah, that is it. So if you want to see some of the production photos as I was working on this, tune over to my Instagram. You can see the sculpting step by step if you don't feel like watching the video, the first part of this video. If you want to see a nice series of still images that also showcase the finished product rather than just this turnaround, go over to my DeviantArt page, all of which are underneath the Burgos art, and you can see the description for that. I mean, the links for that in the commentary below. And I think that's it. This was a long time coming. It was a gift I wanted to give my buddy. Granted, he paid for part of it. He did pay for the figurine, the base figurine. I did all the sculpting, and yeah, you know, fan art for someone I think who deserves it. Definitely check out his work, Red_Spectra, Instagram and Twitch, and I believe he has a Twitter page as well. I don't think he comments too much, but he'll highlight things he finds of interest and, you know, retweet them, you know, just to spread the word, whatever they may be. So yes, send them your love, send them your support, and I think that'll be it. So once again, guys, I am Dante. Like, favorite, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the future. Later. Hello again. If you like this video, please be sure to follow me on all these social media websites with the links in the description down below. Thanks again.